Okay, good morning everyone. My name's Sam Metcalfe. I'm the editor of the Business Desk in the Midlands, and welcome to our latest webinar on how the role of the regions is transforming the UK's post-pandemic recovery. Birmingham's journey has continued throughout the pandemic really, as it races towards a starting gun being fired at this year's Commonwealth Games. Meanwhile, nearshoring is back on the agenda, and while some of the Midlands sector strengths, such as automotive and innovation and life sciences, are brimming with opportunity. How the region maximises the momentum from Coventry City of Culture status last year and Birmingham 2022 this year, as well as the arrival of HS2 and the major developments attracted by the huge infrastructure investment will be crucial in delivering what we hope will be a decade of prosperity. Now, today, in conjunction with our partners from Freeths, we'll ask if there is a much more mixed picture across the Midlands, where investment can often appear to be stuck in the slow lane. We've got an expert panel to discuss these topics and more, I'm sure, with us today. If you've got a question for the panel, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen there, and I'll try and get to you and put your question to the panel. But if we can, I'd like to ask them all to introduce themselves now, starting on my screen. Richard is first, so Richard, please.
Morning, everyone. My name's Richard Beverley. I'm managing partner of Freeths, a national law firm, speaking today from our Birmingham office on Colmore Row. But we have offices throughout the country, including in the Midlands region, Nottingham and Leicester, and we employ around 1,000 people. Thanks, Richard.
David, please.
Morning, everybody. So my name is David Atkinson. I'm head of land and development for Wilmot Dixon in the Midlands. So primarily working with our local authority, public sector customers to look at how we can facilitate the development of new and exciting projects across the region, and bringing sort of expertise to support them in delivery of those schemes, whether it's sort of residential or other sectors.
Thanks, David. Beverley.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Beverley Nielsen. I am an associate professor and executive director at the think tank Ideas at Birmingham City University. I'm also a councillor in Worcestershire and on Malvern Hills District Council, and I am lucky enough to chair a couple of startup businesses in outdoor education and in ultralight rail.
Are you sure you've got time to be here today, Beverley? You sound incredibly busy. Thank you very much. Anita, please.
Right, I'm chair of Beam Music. We run Town Hall and Symphony Hall, and I've been the interim chair of the Greater Birmingham Solihull LEP since October last year, and I'm also vice chair of Warwick University. Before that, I was a BBC lifer who escaped.
Thanks, Anita. And last but not least, Raj.
Hi everyone, I'm Raj Kandola, Head of Policy at the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce, one of the largest chambers in the country with over 2,500 members, been around since 1813, so we like to say we've been in business for over 200 years.
Okay, thanks everyone. Right, I'm going to crack on with the discussion now. Like I say, if the panel's got any questions, if the audience has got any questions for the panel, please do use the Q&A facility. Richard, I'm going to ask for a perception really. Do you think that investment in Birmingham is outstripping the rest of the Midlands? And if you do think that, why do you think it is?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if the answer was that it isn't, then I think you'd be asking why. You know, Birmingham is, I think we'll all agree, is the second city, notwithstanding what our noisy neighbours in Manchester might have to say. And you know, Birmingham's going to be a natural place for people to look, whether they're inward investors or whether they're people looking to move out of London. Birmingham's always going to be on the list, and as we all know, had varying degrees of success in achieving that. There are also obviously a number of sort of key things which are now coming together, like the Commonwealth Games, HS2, etc., which are all helping Birmingham. But there's good stuff happening elsewhere. You know, we've heard recently about money being made available for regeneration in Wolverhampton. We know that, you know, we've got the new battery plant in Coventry. So, you know, that there are exciting things happening outside of Birmingham in the region. And, you know, I think it would be a mistake to look at the various centres in the region as being in competition with one another. I think the key is, to work together and hopefully to leverage off the natural interest and inclination towards Birmingham for the benefit of the other towns and cities in the West Midlands.
Thanks, Richard.
I can pick up, because there was a few years ago when we were thinking about setting up the combined authority, and I've been on the LEP for quite a few years. There was always this debate, should Birmingham be this focus, and where do people hone in when they think about the Midlands? And I think we had to, as a region, had to take a political decision that we needed a focal, somewhere that people across the world could think about. But actually, if you look at the investment that, certainly from the LEP's point of view, the Redditch Gateway, the Litchfield bypass, Birmingham would not survive if it would not grow in the way it's growing if it wasn't for all the other towns and districts around us. Just look at the people who commute into the city centre to work here, and then commute out or live very close by. So I think it's a very complex picture. It's not just about the money that's coming in, it's also about the social and the emotional ties.
I think as well, what's important for us to take a kind of step back is to realise just how proud we should be of that success that has happened within Birmingham over the last sort of 15 or 20 years. And actually what that's done is provided a brilliant platform for the Midlands to grow. And actually it's given us a real framework that we can look at replicating elsewhere in the region and across the country to actually see that growth in different towns and cities. So let's take what we've done there, tweak it, improve it, and let's keep doing it elsewhere.
Raj, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, obviously, our research shows that inward investment to Birmingham fell by 8% in 2020. But if you compare that to the rest of the country, that was a much lower figure, so 17% for the rest of the country. Now, much of these projects obviously lined up before the onset of the pandemic. But even if you look at during what happened during the pandemic, obviously you had the likes of Goldman Sachs opening an office here, the BBC expanding their presence here. So I think there was still that intangible air of optimism which had built up prior to the onset of the pandemic. And I think the building blocks for success were laid there. And I think that's really what's going to power a recovery moving forward.
I think for me, just chipping in, I mean, I think the panel have set out the positives really well, and clearly we have got these major projects, most specifically HS2, 2 stations, interchange and Curzon, and obviously the Commonwealth Games, around £1 billion of investment. It's a massive, these are massive projects. I think for me, the concern is the trickle down impact, and we're specifically looking at levelling up today. Birmingham has, tremendous inequality as a city, and the region too. And I think, when you think that in some parts of Birmingham, 3 out of 4 young children are growing up in poverty, it's a pretty shocking figure. And I think how we tackle that inequality is probably one of the major strands for debate and discussion today. And for me, the devolution agenda is absolutely central to that, taking control for our place, and as much as we can, buying locally from SMEs who are based in the region, employing local people, will help to spread that wealth more effectively into our communities.
Can I think, Beverley, that's a really important point, because I was at HSBC headquarters last week. We've got some amazing buildings, amazing investment, lots of professionals coming into the city and the region, but we're in danger because especially if you look at unemployment figures, say amongst young people, we're in danger of creating a 2-tier society. Professionals who come in and live in amazing houses, and we want them here. We absolutely want them here, but we must not forget the levelling up, which is how do we bring the rest of our communities up to a level where we can all enjoy the richness that the region and Birmingham's facing at the moment.
Thanks, everybody. That's interesting. That kind of point moves me on to my next point about the ESG movement has meant a lot of companies are bringing their supply chains back closer to home, and that will obviously help with local jobs, you would have thought. Is that something you're hearing more and more of, Raj?
I mean, I think so. I think if the pandemic showed anything, it showed the kind of fragility of global supply chains, particularly when it came to, for example, medical supplies. And I think that kind of process of nearshoring was in track before the onset of the pandemic. And I think it will gain greater prominence in the next few months. But just obviously building upon some of the points people have already made, If you think about the advantages that organisations in our city have, you think about the innovation kind of centre, you think about the universities we've got here, the 6 business parks, you think about the transport connectivity we have here. I think you can reach any part of the UK within 4 hours. So I think there's a lot going for us right now that we need to harness and maximise, and I think that's what's going to be key in the next couple of years as we try to build back from the impact of the pandemic.
Can I pick up on that? Because I think it'll be absolutely critical that we transition successfully. And in transitioning, I do think we have obvious strengths around automotive, and clearly we have a very big dependency on automotive manufacturing in this region. But I think that gives us vulnerabilities too if we do not really plan ahead and work across agencies and together as a region. And I think, you know, it was really interesting to hear the comment made about the gigafactory in Coventry. You know, we haven't secured that. We do have preemptive planning in place, and I know that Coventry City Council are doing everything they can to try and secure that gigafactory. But at the moment, really, the gigafactories, such as they are looking to be in Sunderland and in the north of the country, and are ahead of us at the moment. And obviously China is a massive force of competition here. So I think for us, really being able to get some positive statements and funding from the government, and to be able to work with JLR and our key automotive producers is going to be absolutely critical, because the IP increasingly is moving into the battery production for the OEMs and out of the drivetrain, which is sort of moving down to tiers 2 and 3 in terms of production. So this is something really critical for the region. And if we get it right, we can diversify across into the other green products that are going to drive the green industrial revolution.
I think that's obviously a very good point, Beverley, and it also is allied to the point you made earlier about you know, people and the need for people to have jobs, and good jobs that pay a decent wage. And there's no doubt that, you know, there is a labour shortage. We think that around 1 million people left the labour market during COVID. But it's having the right kind of people, isn't it, with the right sort of training, and you know, getting more skilled labour available. Initiatives such as the sort of rail college, etc., are going to be so vital in terms of attracting you know, the new industries and more sustainable industries.
And I think, Richard, that's such an important point. We need to make sure our FE, it's not just about higher education. People often turn to higher education, but FE and the skills agenda is we haven't got it right yet. We really need to work harder at that. We have all these boot camps that appear for young people to attend to, but then we don't handhold them into apprenticeships, and then we don't handhold them into the next stage. And I think we are not joined up here on the skills agenda, and we need to do a lot more to ensure that there is an approach and a journey, and actually that journey talks very loudly with the employers, because they know what they want. We then need to join up all the other dots to make sure it works for the young people who've got to get into those jobs, and not just leave them, go to a boot camp and leave them isolated there, and they can't see the next steps.
And may I just pick up on your point, Anita, because, you know, a very good point about further education and the need for really applied technical skills development and craft skills, which are going to be vital for our green industrial revolution. But one of the sort of areas that gets left out on the educational agenda so much is adult education. Funding has fallen by about 50% since 2010. It's something you scarcely hear about in educational terms. But if we're going to reskill, you know, perhaps I think the WMCA 5-year plan talks about 140,000 people in the region needing reskilling. That's a real serious adult education agenda. So we're going to need to fund that and Anita, really integrate our agenda and work together as you commented.
Absolutely. And we shouldn't be frightened of saying that we need more resource to teach people English and to bring their English levels up to somewhere, or maths levels, or this understanding of science. We're a bit frightened of tackling this issue about numeracy and literacy.
Yeah, I think what's interesting though as well is it in terms of solving that problem, there is an element of it which is sort of the responsibility of us in terms of being able to organise further and higher education and sort of structured training around it. But as a business community as well, there is a huge onus on us to actually start to take some ownership of some of those issues and actually be focusing some of our recruitment and our development around bringing people in either through apprenticeship schemes or looking at people who are transitioning from different careers on wanting to find something new to do, people leaving the armed services, etc. And there are real opportunities for us to be able to tap into some great talent, some really dedicated individuals that don't actually come through some of the traditional routes. And we find that they are some of our most committed colleagues who we work alongside with, where actually they've been given that opportunity and the support to be able to shine and grow.
There's a really interesting example of how you carry people through. During COVID, we trained up so many people to simply put, not simply, but put jabs, give people a vaccination. Now, health services, there's a huge challenge, workforce challenge. There just aren't enough nurses, paramedics, etc. And we've got a real crisis in terms of the health agenda and workforce. And I just wonder, there are lots of people there who are interested in doing something in that arena. How have we got the steps in place to take them from giving vaccinations to the next stage, whether we take them in to train as nurses or paramedics. And here again, it's about partnership and joined up thinking. And if we were marking our own report, we'd have to say we could do better.
Okay, Anita, Raj, is it from your members, hearing from your members, is there a skills challenge at every level, every size of business?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but we did a piece of work for Birmingham City Council last year, contributing to their Breaking Down Barriers report. And essentially that was a piece of work which looked at the barriers that local firms face in hiring 16 to 24-year-olds. So as we know, so youth employment, particularly in Birmingham, was particularly hit by the impact of the pandemic. And the good thing was the majority of businesses we spoke to felt the talent was there in the region. The issue was around how they access it and some uncertainty around how they go about speaking to either schools or colleges. They felt it was quite a convoluted kind of landscape where there was lots of different initiatives going on. Perhaps it wasn't quite joined up. So I think there's, as Beverley and Anita alluded to, there's a role that we need to play to ensure that these projects and these initiatives are joined up, are thought about, and really, making it as easy as possible for a business to, for example, hire an apprentice, take on a grad. I think that's going to be absolutely key moving forward.
Okay, let's move on to HS2. There's no doubt it's going to transform the Birmingham city centre. But Richard, how do we make sure that it's not just Birmingham city centre that benefits from HS2? What can we do to make sure it benefits the whole region, East and West Midlands?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious thing is to make sure that, the connectivity, once people have got off HS2, works for the other key centres. And I think, most of us who travel around Europe and, go to the cities of Europe, generally speaking, we're not as good at it as they tend to be on the continent, or at least that seems to be the perception. So, more investment in buses, trams, etc. I think is going to be absolutely critical.
No.
Sam, can I just come on?
Trams at work. That's right.
Yeah, we'll leave that one there. But no, I was just going to say, I think what's really important to do, and again, it's funny that we're still having this conversation 10 years after the project was announced, but really understanding that how businesses across the region as a whole will benefit from this program, because I still think there's a perception out there that people think the only people who benefit are the ones based in Birmingham. That's not true. If you think about the supply chain opportunities, if it's a caterer in the Black Country that can apply for work related to the project, more and more organisations need to be aware of this and understand that they can benefit from this project, and it is transformative, and it is going to create thousands of jobs and thousands of apprenticeships. But we still need to do a better job in obviously winning the kind of hearts and minds, and I think that's going to be a real challenge over the next couple of years. But thank God we've got a project of this size and scale as we emerge from the pandemic, given the challenges that we've seen in the last couple of years.
I think I would, just to build on Richard's point, there would be, in terms of the outcomes from HS2, there would be nothing more disappointing than HS2 stations which were surrounded by car parking, where people were able to sort of drive in from wealthier towns and villages, park up and head down to London for the day. And we've absolutely got to be able to capitalise on creating a unified and connected transport network that feeds into HS2. So actually we're taking some of those cars off the road. People are making those journeys by public transport. People in some of the surrounding towns and villages are actually able to travel in and utilise that link down to London and up to Manchester on a sort of regular or ad hoc basis, rather than just feeling as though they've got to jump into the car to do it, because otherwise it would just be a real lost opportunity for us.
Yes, I'd like to jump in there and say completely agree with Richard and David on that. And I thought Midlands Connects, the rail hub, the Midlands Rail Hub plans are absolutely critical in terms of upgrading the infrastructure, ensuring greater connectivity between our cities and urban centres, and especially out to some of the rural areas where, you know, as Anita commented, our commuters are coming in from, you know, Worcestershire, Warwickshire and so forth. It was disappointing to learn, and I'd appreciate any updates from panel members, but as far as I understood it, looking at recent reports, the metro extension to Solihull has been delayed, and there was great disappointment I saw, because that would have meant 6-minute connections from Birmingham to Chelmsley Wood and obviously on to the airport and Chelmsley Wood, giving people previously perhaps disconnected from job opportunities and employment the opportunity to connect up to employment. And so often areas of deprivation are not well connected and people can't get a job, and you hear this so often from employers about meeting people they'd like to give a job to, but they don't maybe have a car, the buses don't operate in their areas, and they can't get into work. So I think this point is absolutely critical, and between Midlands Connect and the combined authority we must make sure we get the 700 million or so, which, you know, in transport terms is not a lot of money, into our area, especially when we know so much that London has had this vast overweight funding on transport compared to the regions and our own especially.
And as well as transport, I think we have to think about housing. You know, if you look at how the enterprise zone has been used, quite a lot of money has been used from the enterprise zone in Birmingham to enhance Paradise. I think from we've released something like 139 million ourselves from the LEP for the enterprise zone. But the enterprise zone, and when we talk to the leader of Birmingham City Council and others, isn't just about transport and bringing more employment in. It's actually about getting people to live in those areas. So placemaking and how we make places come to life. Otherwise, we're going to have, again, people coming in to buy some very, very expensive housing or flats in the centre of the city centre, and social housing gets pushed, and that makes people more and more difficult for them to access employment or opportunities. And I think there is a commitment to make sure the social housing is there every time we build any other kind of housing. And I think we have to hold people to account while we do that, to make sure it is a commitment that's carried through.
Thanks, Anita. There's a question from Trevor Dimmock. Which comes back to your initial point, Richard. I think Trevor's clearly a bit of a HS2 skeptic. He's saying, does the panel think that HS2 will really contribute to regional levelling up? Would the funds be better utilised on improving local connectivity, or is there an argument to say we can do both?
I guess part of this is whatever side of the debate you're on HS2, and that could be the subject of a whole other webinar. I'm sure it's been a subject of many. We are where we are, aren't we? And the money has been committed, and I suppose on the plus side, those of us in this region, you know, at least are due to benefit from it, and it is up to us to maximise the opportunity. I think one thing that we've not commented on yet is the likely cost in terms of the cost of using HS2, and I think that clearly is a concern. You know, it is already extremely expensive to travel from London to Birmingham on the existing rail network. So query how expensive it's going to be once HS2 comes on, and then that will need to be thought about. And also, the points that Beverley and Anita have been making about connecting from HS2 to other areas and less affluent areas. We do need to make sure that the cost of that onward connection is affordable.
I think let's also just sort of bounce. Sorry, Beverley, go on.
No, David, no, you go ahead.
I would just say with HS2, whilst the high speed is sort of in the name, we need to bear in mind that one of the key drivers for actually delivery of HS2 is just lack of capacity on the current network. And come what may, there is going to be a need for us to be able to grow our connectivity to the north and down to London as well. And actually HS2 seemed to be the most appropriate way of doing it.
I just wanted to jump in and say on HS2, I hope the pricing is competitive, and certainly, if you go on the TGV in France, you can get really quite inexpensive tickets and move around the country very easily. So I do think that that should be something the government's taking an interest in. I think the other thing that's interesting in Birmingham recently and should help with connectivity, assuming we can use our new revenue stream from the clean air zone, because I do think it's interesting that Nottingham has got a longer metro than Birmingham, 32 kilometres compared to around 22 kilometres for Birmingham, and a much higher passenger usage on their metro at, well, pre-COVID at 18.7 million or so compared to 8 million or so in Birmingham. I think the underdevelopment of our metro integrated into good, regular and reliable bus services in Birmingham is really critical, because there was that very interesting report highlighting that due to congestion, we were losing a lot of productivity as a city, around 7%, because our buses just aren't reliable at peak time. And that's not because of the operators, that's because of the fact that, whether it's bus lanes or whether it's smart, intelligent lights allowing our buses to move quickly and ahead of waiting traffic, isn't working across the city and into cities as well. And I really think there's a big opportunity with a revenue stream through the clean air zone to start doing things for ourselves and being really accountable to our populations. And that's certainly what I'd like to see, more accountability locally with local people, particularly from the areas of deprivation, having a voice and a say in what they want to connect up their communities.
Beverley, just a question on that, I suppose. I completely agree with the sentiment around it. Do you think we've got the power to be able to do that at the moment, or do you think actually that requires more of a change and more power to the regions and to the authorities?
Well, I don't think I know the answer fully to that, but I do think that there's a terrible inclination to sit back and wait, to be done unto, rather than getting on and doing. And I think it's really interesting, that Manchester's at Devo Deal 6 and we're at Devo Deal 3. And, I worry at times that we're a little bit defensive about Manchester, but I did hear somebody speaking yesterday at a meeting I was at who had come from Midas, the investment agency in Manchester, and who was commenting about, their ability to work on special project vehicles and so forth, a skill set that seems to be lacking here in the West Midlands. I would love to see more of that sort of joined up capacity to drive these investment projects that aren't the big shiny projects like the HS2s, but are the projects that are really going to drive wealth and the levelling up agenda, wealth across our communities, opportunities for employment into our most deprived communities. And I'd be really interested to hear from panel members about how we might go about that.
Can we just, Raj, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I mean, just in regards to David's question. So yeah, all the money raised from the clean air zone, as Beverley has said, has to be put back into local transport projects. The government does take a part of that revenue for administering the running of the clean air zone, but they've actually put that percentage up from 6% to 15%. So obviously the city council is saying that's less money for us to spend on local transport projects, which kind of undermines the whole point. And it's quite interesting as well, as you might have seen in the last few weeks, literally when the Prime Minister and the government announced the levelling up released Levelling Up white paper. A couple of days later, Boris Johnson came in and said, we're going to sort out the clean air zone in Manchester and make sure it doesn't go ahead. So I think there is a bit of a disconnect there between the rhetoric the government are employing around levelling up and the actual practical application that we're seeing across the country right now, which is something that needs to be addressed urgently, I'd say.
Before we move on from transport, Jonathan Dudley from Crow, Beverley, wants to know about the possibility of or viability of replacing Birmingham's broken Spanish trams with British-built replacements. Is this something? Is this a specialist subject of yours, Beverley?
Sorry, who asked that question?
Jonathan Dudley.
Oh, Jonathan. Well, it's very close to my heart, Jonathan. And yeah, I feel really, really strongly that this is a sort of example of procurement perhaps not working as we would wish it to work. I mean, we're buying here Spanish trams from CAF, but obviously Alstom is being procured elsewhere. And I do, look across to Coventry and the VLR project, the Very Light Rail project, and the fact that WMG and Coventry City Council have been working with pretty much entirely British sourced suppliers and components. And so I do think we've got an opportunity to move from metro into very light and ultralight rail opportunities in connecting our cities. These are, say, 20-ton trams compared to 44-ton trams, much lighter, much more flexible, much more affordable, and something I really think that, we've taken far too long in piloting. So thanks for your question, Jonathan.
Thanks, Beverley, and thank you, Jonathan. Let's move on to the Commonwealth Games and the legacy of it. Richard, what kind of legacy really do you want to see the region adopt, or what kind of legacy for the region do you want to see rather in the aftermath of the Games this summer?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's the obvious international recognition point, isn't it? Which is sort of helps to ensure that Birmingham is, internationally recognised as an important place, and a place that people might want to visit and invest in. But then you've got the whole legacy issue, the improvement in the local the localities where the games are going to be held, and the investment there, and hopefully a longer lasting improvement in connectivity. But I think more than anything else, I mean, we've been through a pretty grim period, haven't we? And raising people's morale. Again, I think that Birmingham doesn't always have that kind of, call it Manchester swagger about it. And again, hopefully this will assist with that. So it's got to be good, provided it happens, and it all happens on time, because some of the timetabling does seem to sound a bit tight at the moment, but I'm sure we'll get there.
Where I'm sitting, I can see the cranes just out of my window here. So the stadium isn't that far away, and I think, yes, we're going to have some amazing infrastructure legacy to be handed over. If you live in Perry Bar, which is, Beverley, you probably know the area from the university, quite a very deprived, difficult area. So new bus stations are appearing. The roads are being improved. It's causing chaos here, though. But away from the infrastructure, what is it that we want? Well, we need people to think about the skills, because the legacy for me isn't going to be just about the shiny projects. At the left, we've put in millions of pounds into the stadium, but actually what we want is a follow through. If all those people who volunteered, what are the skills we're going to offer them? How are we going to try and get those people who are unemployed into some work? How are we going to get those small businesses that win contracts now get into keeping themselves going, become sustainable, become businesses in their own rights going forward? So I think that work has to start now, not at the end of the games. I'm sure we'll deliver the games on time. The stadium looks terrific. We were there a couple of weeks ago. It's going to be on time, but it's what afterwards will the people around here get? And I think I'm not sure whether we've got that clearly in our heads. There'll be a great cultural festival as well, which, there's so much to celebrate. But then what afterward? I hope I don't sound negative, because now I think the Commonwealth Games are so important for the city and the region. People will be coming into Birmingham, they'll go to Stratford, they'll go across the whole of the region, and pick up all the great culture stuff. And become real tourists, which is what we want. We want tourists to come here, spend money, stay in our hotels, go to the bars and restaurants. But for the people who work and live here, we need to really focus on what we do for them going forward.
There's an important lesson to learn from that, I think, Anita, in terms of the way that those sorts of major infrastructure and cultural projects are procured. Actually, when the authorities are appointing partners, contractors, developers, actually making sure that sort of commitment to local spend and the accountability for delivery within the using a local supply chain and building those community links isn't just something that's put into a tender document early on, but actually there are real opportunities to monitor that throughout the course of a project, and also in the legacy that's left afterwards as well, so we can really demonstrate that those wider social values that come from the delivery of the project are actually being delivered by that supply chain.
Raj, what role does business have to play in the games legacy?
Oh, if you look at the games themselves, obviously it's the first games that's going to actually embed an ESG element within it, in its framework. They are expecting, I think, around 35,000 jobs and kind of volunteer opportunities to be created as well. I think obviously that's going to be very important for young people moving forward. But I think ultimately it's what the panelists are saying. It's about making sure that the businesses are able to access these opportunities, understanding how it will benefit their organisations, and obviously thinking about those supply chain opportunities, a bit like HS2 as well. So I do think there is an opportunity there. It just obviously needs to be presented in a way that's attractive to business, and they understand that they can benefit from this amazing opportunity moving forward.
I think the test will be if some of our SMEs who are now, we've supported from the LEP the food and industry. The real test will be if some of those SMEs really survive. And I think we, the LEP and others need to find ways of supporting them from now into their delivery of the games and then beyond. And I know, Beverley, SMEs are your passion, so you must have some ways for us to do that going forward.
Well, thank you, Anita, for that comment. I was actually going to I've been trying to get in on a separate point, because I worry about the Commonwealth Games a bit, not because I don't think the city is going to look really amazing, and I do think a huge amount of work has been done, and I have to say, at a personal level, I think Birmingham's never looked as good, and I'm sure it'll look even better when we get to the games themselves. But I do worry again about the links into the local communities and the local children, using these facilities. And it's not just about, a tiny percentage of elite athletes who are going to, have a focus on them for a few weeks or months, but actually young people in deprived communities being able to access our new aquatic centre, the tracks at Perry Bar. These are amazing facilities, but I'm afraid what I'm hearing is that they don't even know really that these things are happening, and that the sort of amazing people in our communities who go out and coach young kids, every weekend or in the evenings during the week, and build that sort of desire to be a team sport, play a team sport, to have a bit of discipline, to get used to working with people you don't know very well. I mean, all of these fantastic things that sports can give. I'm unfortunately hearing from local communities that we're not actually, that hasn't been embedded into the whole process of the games. And I think that if that's right, that's a really missed opportunity. And it's not about capital funding, it's about revenue funding going to all those amazing charitable organisations that are running sports activities for kids in our region.
Well, let's hope that changes, Beverley. We've got a few minutes left. I wanted to go around the panel really. I mean, obviously pandemic aside, do you think this will be seen as a kind of golden period for Birmingham and maybe the wider West Midlands with the huge amounts of investment, the HS2 and then the Commonwealth Games as well? And where do you see the next decade taking the region? What will what will be the next big thing or the next big growth centre. So I'll go around the panel before we end. So Raj, can I start with you?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic about the upcoming decade. I think we've already talked about some of the huge opportunities on the horizon. I think what the panel have really kind of highlighted today is to ensure that all parts of the region benefit from this. And I think it comes back to this point about giving people an opportunity, not a grievance. So you think about, for example, the number of people in the Black country that leave school without any qualifications. You know, this is where these are the structural issues that we really need to address if everyone is going to fully embrace the benefits which hopefully the next few years will bring. I mean, I think obviously the panel will come on to talk about our areas of strength. So you're thinking about kind of banking, professional services, you think about green technology, sustainability, kind of retrofitting and things like that. All those things are really important. But I think what's really interesting as well is thinking about some of those nascent areas, whether it might be, I know Beverley will know more about this than me, kind of very light rail, 5G adaptation, air purification, things like this. You know, these are things that are really interesting and have potentially a lot of kind of ability to kind of drive productivity in the next few years if we are going to bridge that gap between ourselves and London. But it also always comes back to, in these nascent clusters, issues around access to finance, having, like people have said today, the skill set in the local workforce, but also, you know, the absence of local supply chains in these new kind of developing areas. So I think that's one thing that we really need to address in the coming years. But I do feel very optimistic about the upcoming decade.
Good. Anita.
You mentioned quite a lot there. I think I have the least worry about the professional services, because I think they're well embedded into the city and the region and will continue to grow, and the investments that the big companies have put in. So it's the least worrying about that. I think the great opportunities will be around super tech, life sciences, how we think about the technology around. I'm thinking, you know, some of the universities here working around technology, around transport. But there's an area I have to mention, which is it often gets ignored, and that's the creative economy. Our creative economy has the potential to drive in inward investment, to drive in people coming into the city, to drive tourism, but to create those jobs for freelancers, SMEs. It's taken us years. Before Andy Street wasn't even a mayor then, and he was chair of the LEP when we started to dialogue with the BBC to get more investment here. So it's taken years to get the creative industries going. Our creative economy is now growing, and I think we mustn't forget it. If we forget and we don't support its growth, we lose out on a great opportunity. And we know across the whole country there are billions, that it's worth billions, and we know the government wants to invest in it. So I would think that there's a great opportunity for us to hone in on the creative economy and think, how do we support that going forward, as well as the super tech and life sciences, etc.
Thanks, Anita. Beverley.
Yeah, I mean, really powerful point there about the creative industries and economy. I mean, it is a vastly growing sector for the economy. I think for me, I'd really like to see us being a sort of more focus on being a self-made place, you know, where we are determining what we want to do, growing our sectors, making the most of the opportunities, particularly in the green transition, which we cannot ignore, and is going to provide, you know, vast opportunities for growth creation. The government suggests about 250,000 jobs, but you know, it's much more than that, I'm quite sure. I think for us, if we're really looking at the ecosystem that exists in the West Midlands, where are the points of weakness? How do we sort of really buffer those and support them? And, you know, that is, I think, very much as Raj suggests, that investment, it's just a constant thing that our startup economy highlights. And, you know, those companies in the Valley of Death, you know, as their technology gets ready for commercial exploitation and viability, really hard to support them in that so-called Valley of Death. We've got to retain our talent, and I do think we can learn a lot more from other centres as to how they do that. You know, people did talk for a while about golden handcuffs and handshakes and things like this for students, you know, keeping them here, not losing them to London and the southeast, making sure that they're aware of the opportunities here, whether it's FE, HE, or adult returners and so forth. And I think the circular economy, we really need to get serious about sourcing locally, aware of the carbon footprint of the goods, so that we're not just simply offshoring our carbon footprint, you know, by importing solar panels and heat pumps, but actually increasingly making the things that we need in our economy here. So those would be my real sort of comments for the next decade.
Thanks, Beverley. David.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I mean, I sort of echo what everybody else has said. Hugely optimistic about where the next 10 years will take us. The sort of large-scale infrastructure investment platform is there for us to be able to build on and look nothing more than to see that delivered, and for us to look at what the next opportunity will be. I think one of the things that we're really seeing at the moment in terms of the conversations we're having with our customers and with their customers as well is the kind of sustainability and the green agenda for housing in particular is really starting to be pushed like that. So when we talk to local authorities with a sort of housing program, the kind of realization of just the sort of fuel poverty pressure that their tenants are under at the moment is really starting to come to the fore now. And actually the onus is on us as a development and a construction industry to be able to start to respond to that and to be able to deliver the low carbon, zero carbon homes with the reduced energy demand and reduced energy bills that sit alongside there, to actually give people those kind of great sustainable places to live and create the communities where actually they don't have to be worrying about the cost of turning on the heating in the evening, because the home that they've been delivered for them actually doesn't really need you to turn it on, say for the sort of depths of winter. And it's those sorts of things that are just really becoming very, very critical right now. And actually we should seize the opportunity to be the leader in that as we grow out of kind of Birmingham and Nottingham to some of the surrounding towns in the Midlands.
Thanks, David. And finally, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't really have this conversation without being cognizant of the changes which have really occurred as a result of the pandemic, but also underpinned by some sort of socio-economic generational changes on perspectives that were emerging anyway. And you know, my perception is that there has been a shift in the way that people think and feel, and people want to have more control over their day-to-day lives, and they want to live their best lives and to have good work-life balance, and are generally aspirational. And I think that creates quite a challenge in terms of meeting those aspirations. And you know, I think Anita talked about placemaking earlier on. You know, we need to make places wherever they are and however they fit in the whole sort of supply chain. You know, whether it's Birmingham city centre or whether it's one of the satellite towns. You know, how do they fit? What is that place all about? And how can we make sure that it's a place that will deliver on people's aspirations and desires? And that involves all the things we've been talking today, doesn't it? You know, good transport, good training, good jobs, and trying to sort of, the critical thing I think is trying to be better at bringing all these things together, and that's a big challenge.
It is, but I'm glad we're all relatively optimistic, right? Good. Okay, so real food for thought. I'm sure we could carry on for another hour, couldn't we? But it's been a really interesting 50 minutes or so. I'd like to thank our audience for tuning in today. Panelists, thank you to Richard, David, Beverley, Anita and Raj, and thank you to Freeths for sponsoring today's event. We'll see you soon at another event of ours. Thank you very much.
Thank you.